At 3:17 a.m., a sound exploded outside our home. Not a knock, not a warning, but a high-decibel alarm so violent it rattled walls and shattered sleep. My disabled wife screamed, collapsing to the floor, hands over her ears as pain tore through her body. Her condition couldn't handle noise like that. Karen knew this. Outside, under the streetlight, the HOA president stood smiling, holding a clipboard like a trophy. She said it was community enforcement. The alarm didn't stop. Neighbors begged. Police arrived and left. That's when she leaned toward our window and whispered words I'll never forget. People like you don't last here. What she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that the son whose mother she was torturing was trained to survive war. And this time, the battlefield was her own neighborhood. Before we go any further into this story, I want to ask you something real. Which city are you watching this video from right now? Drop your city name in the comments, whether it's New York, Houston, Chicago, Los Angeles, or a small town no one's ever heard of. I read every single comment, and your support means more than you know. Stories like this don't just happen in one neighborhood. They happen everywhere, behind quiet streets, perfect lawns, and smiling HOA signs. And that's why this story matters. If you believe that no one should be harassed, especially someone who's disabled, if you believe power should protect, not punish, then take 1 second and subscribe to this channel right now. It helps these stories reach people who need to hear them. This isn't just a story about an HOA dispute. This is a story about abuse disguised as rules, about silence used as a weapon, and about how far one woman was willing to go to feel powerful. What started as noise complaints turned into something darker, something calculated, something cruel. And what Karen didn't realize was that every action leaves evidence, every sound leaves a record, and every bully eventually meets resistance. So take a breath. Stay with me. Because once this story begins, there's no turning back. Let's start from the very beginning. When we signed the papers on that house, the real estate agent used the word quiet 3 different times. Quiet streets, quiet neighbors, quiet living. For my wife, Emily, that word meant survival. Emily wasn't always disabled. She was a middle school art teacher who filled our home with music and laughter. 5 years ago, a drunk driver ran a red light and erased that version of her life in a single violent second. Her spine healed, her bones healed, but her nervous system never did. Loud, sudden noises don't just bother her, they attack her. Her doctors call it auditory-triggered neurological trauma. To Emily, it feels like lightning inside her skull. Pain so intense it steals her breath, her balance, her dignity. So, when we moved into that HOA-controlled neighborhood, we weren't chasing luxury. We were chasing peace. The HOA brochure promised community harmony, respectful enforcement, and neighbor-first values. It even bragged about strict noise control policies. I remember looking at Emily and saying, "This is it. This is where you can finally breathe." For the first 2 weeks, it felt like a miracle. Emily slept through the night for the first time in years. Morning sunlight filled the living room. Neighbors waved politely. Kids rode bikes without screaming. Even the air felt calmer. Then Karen introduced herself. She knocked on our door on a Tuesday afternoon, clipboard tucked under her arm, smile sharp enough to cut glass. She didn't ask how we were settling in. She didn't welcome us. She looked past me, scanning our home like an inspector searching for flaws. "I'm Karen," she said, "HOA board president." Her eyes stopped on Emily's noise-canceling headphones. She raised an eyebrow. "Those aren't very neighborly," she said. I laughed awkwardly, assuming it was a joke. It wasn't. Emily explained her condition softly, the way she always does, apologetically like her pain is an inconvenience to others. Karen nodded, but her smile never changed. "Well," she said, clicking her pen, "we have standards here." That sentence hung in the air long after she left. At first, the emails were small, petty, easy to ignore. Trash bin placed too early. Garage door open longer than permitted. Non-approved garden decor. Every message ended the same way. Failure to comply may result in penalties. Emily started jumping every time her phone buzzed. Stress tightened her shoulders. Her headaches returned. I replied professionally, politely. I followed every rule to the letter. Still, the emails increased. Then came the first noise complaint. It arrived at 2:14 a.m. Karen claimed we had been playing loud music. Emily and I were asleep. Our house was silent. I wrote back immediately explaining, again, Emily's disability. I attached medical documentation. I requested a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. Karen's response arrived the next morning. Disabilities do not exempt residents from compliance. I read it 3 times. That's when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about control. Karen began appearing outside our house, standing on the sidewalk, pretending to check her phone, watching. Once, I caught her photographing our windows. Emily stopped opening the blinds. One evening, I found her sitting on the floor of the bathroom, shaking. She doesn't like us, Emily whispered. I can feel it. I told her everything would be okay. I was wrong. Karen escalated strategically. She knew exactly where to apply pressure. She cited potential noise violations. She sent warnings about future enforcement measures. She CC'd lawyers. Then she installed it. A commercial-grade high-decibel alarm mounted near the HOA fence line, pointed directly at our bedroom window. When I confronted her, she smiled calmly. It's for security, she said, perfectly within HOA guidelines. I told her the noise could seriously injure my wife. Karen tilted her head. Well, she replied, maybe this neighborhood just isn't a good fit for everyone. That night, Emily didn't sleep. Neither did I. And somewhere deep inside, a truth settled in my chest, cold and heavy. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was testing how much pain she could cause before someone stopped her. And she hadn't yet met the person who would. Karen didn't raise her voice. She didn't make threats. She didn't break the law, at least not on paper. That was the most dangerous part. Everything she did lived in the gray space between technically allowed and morally wrong. And she knew it. The first time the alarm went off, it was just after midnight. A sudden, piercing shriek ripped through the bedroom, slicing through sleep like a blade. Emily woke up screaming, clutching her head as if something inside her had shattered. Her body locked up, muscles seizing, breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. I jumped out of bed, heart racing, and ran to the window. The street was empty, quiet, still. Then I saw it, a red strobe light blinking on the HOA fence line, and beneath it, the source of the sound, a metal box bolted into place, humming like a living thing. The alarm shut off after 30 seconds. 30 seconds was all it took. Emily was vomiting. Her vision blurred. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. By the time I got her calmed down, the damage was done. Her nervous system was in full revolt. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Karen sent an email. Security test completed successfully. No apology. No warning. No acknowledgement of what she'd done. I called her immediately. She answered on the second ring. HOA President Karen speaking. I told her what the alarm did to my wife. I told her she was risking serious medical harm. I told her this crossed the line. She listened quietly. Then she said, if your wife is that sensitive, perhaps she should consider assisted living. Something snapped inside me. I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. I attached medical records, letters from doctors, ADA documentation. Karen replied by CCing the HOA attorney. The attorney replied with one sentence. The HOA is not responsible for individual medical conditions. That's when the harassment became systematic. The alarm didn't go off every night. That would have been too obvious. Instead, Karen activated it randomly, sometimes at 11 p.m., sometimes at 4 a.m., sometimes in the middle of the afternoon when Emily was alone. The unpredictability was deliberate. It kept Emily in a constant state of fear. She stopped showering without me nearby. She flinched at every sudden sound. She wore noise-canceling headphones in her own home. Karen noticed, and she mocked it. At the next HOA meeting, she mentioned residents wearing industrial equipment indoors as an example of non-community behavior. People laughed. Emily cried in the car afterward, apologizing to me for being too much. That was the moment I realized the goal wasn't compliance. The goal was to break her. Neighbors started acting differently. Some avoided us. Others whispered. Karen's narrative spread. That we were difficult, dramatic, problematic. One evening, a neighbor knocked on our door quietly. "I don't want trouble," she said, eyes darting down the street. "But the alarm? She's doing it on purpose." She told me Karen had bragged about forcing people out before, about how HOA power was a useful tool. I recorded the conversation. That was the first time I stopped reacting and started documenting. Every email, every alarm activation, every witness. Karen sensed the shift. The fines arrived next. $50 for alleged noise disturbances, $100 for failure to comply, $250 for repeat violations, violations for sounds we never made. When I appealed, Karen denied it herself, acting as judge, jury, and executioner. Emily's health spiraled. She had 2 seizures in 1 week. Her doctor warned that continued exposure could cause permanent damage. I begged Karen to stop. I stood in front of her office and said, "If you have any humanity at all..." She cut me off. "This is a community," she said coldly, "and communities don't bend for individuals." That night, the alarm went off again. This time, police arrived. I explained everything. Showed documentation, medical letters, videos, the officer's side. "Sir, it's an HOA matter." Karen stood behind them, arms crossed, smiling. Emily was taken to the emergency room shortly after. The pain had triggered another neurological episode. I sat alone in the ER waiting room, staring at my hands, wondering how cruelty could hide behind rules so easily. At 5:42 a.m., my phone rang. It was Daniel, our son, our pride, our protector, even from thousands of miles away. He asked how Mom was. I told him the truth. There was silence on the line. Then he said, quietly, with a calm that chilled me, "Dad, is this being documented?" I told him yes. "Good," he replied, "because what she's doing isn't enforcement." I asked him what it was. He said, "It's psychological warfare." And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope, because Karen believed power only flowed one way. She was about to learn what happens when the wrong person is pushed too far. The emergency room has a sound that never leaves you. It's not the beeping machines or the hurried footsteps. It's the silence between them, the kind that presses on your chest and forces you to think about everything that could go wrong. Emily lay on the hospital bed, pale, exhausted, her eyes half closed. The seizure had passed, but the damage lingered. Her doctor spoke carefully, choosing words like stepping around broken glass. "Repeated neurological trauma can compound," he said. "If the triggers continue, recovery becomes harder, sometimes impossible." I knew exactly what he meant. The alarm. Karen. The house that was supposed to heal us was now hurting her. I sat beside Emily, holding her hand, feeling useless. She squeezed my fingers weakly and whispered, "I'm sorry." That broke me. She wasn't the one who should be apologizing. When we finally got home just before dawn, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Lawns trimmed, lights off, the kind of quiet that hides ugly truths. The red strobe was still there. I stared at it from the driveway, imagining it turning on again, imagining Emily screaming, imagining another ambulance ride. Inside the house, Emily refused to go back into the bedroom. "It's too close," she said, voice trembling. "I can't sleep there." We set up a temporary bed in the living room, farthest from the fence. She wore headphones, a sleep mask, and still flinched every time a car passed. I didn't sleep at all. At 5:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Daniel, our son, rarely called at that hour unless something was wrong. I stepped outside so Emily wouldn't hear. "Dad," he said quietly. I had a feeling. He'd seen the missed calls from the hospital. He'd read my emails. He knew something had been building. I told him everything. Not the softened version. Not the protective parent edit. The truth. I told him about the alarm. About Karen's emails. About the seizures. About Emily apologizing for being in pain. There was a long pause. Then Daniel exhaled slowly. I'm trained to recognize hostile patterns, he said. This isn't random. She's escalating pressure to force compliance or removal. I laughed bitterly. Are you analyzing our HOA like a combat zone? No, he replied. I'm recognizing abuse. That word hit harder than anything else. Abuse. Not a dispute. Not a misunderstanding. Not strict enforcement. Abuse. Daniel asked one question that changed everything. Do you have recordings? I told him about the emails, the fines, the neighbor statement, the videos. Good, he said, because this kind of thing ends one of two ways. I asked him how. Either the victim breaks, he said, or the aggressor gets exposed. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. I'm coming home. I told him he couldn't. He was deployed. He had responsibilities. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, So, do you? That afternoon, Karen sent another notice. Final warning. Non-compliance may result in further action. Further action. Against a disabled woman recovering from a seizure. Emily read it and stared at the wall. I don't think I can do this anymore, she whispered. I don't feel safe. That sentence terrified me more than any alarm ever could. Safety isn't just locks and doors. It's peace inside your own head. And Karen had stolen that. That evening, something shifted. The alarm didn't go off. Instead, Karen showed up. She stood on the sidewalk across from our house, arms folded, watching, not hiding, not pretending, watching. I walked outside. Is there something you need? I asked. She smiled calmly. I'm evaluating the situation, she said. The board is considering next steps. What steps? I asked. She leaned forward slightly. Removal, she said. Some residents just aren't compatible with community standards. I felt the urge to shout, to threaten, to lose control. Instead, I did something different. I pulled out my phone. Karen noticed. Her smile flickered just for a second. I'm documenting this interaction, I said calmly. Her eyes hardened. You can't intimidate me, she snapped. I'm not, I replied. I'm protecting my family. She walked away without another word. That night, the alarm screamed again. Longer this time. Louder. Emily curled into a ball on the living room floor, sobbing, hands over her ears. I held her and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep. When the sound finally stopped, the house felt hollow. I checked my phone. A message from Daniel. I've initiated legal assistance. ADA. Civil rights. Federal level. My hands shook as I read it. Another message followed. She doesn't know who she's dealing with. The next morning, Karen posted on the HOA message board. Some families misuse medical claims to avoid compliance. This board will not tolerate manipulation. Neighbors saw it. Screenshots spread. So did anger. Karen had overplayed her hand. She thought she was untouchable. She had no idea the alarm she kept using to terrorize us was about to become the loudest evidence against her. And the quiet neighborhood she ruled was about to hear the truth. Daniel came home 3 days later. Not quietly, not secretly, but deliberately. I watched from the front window as a rideshare stopped at the curb. Daniel stepped out wearing civilian clothes, but nothing about him blended in. He carried himself differently now, posture straight, eyes alert, presence heavy. The kind of presence that makes people look twice without knowing why. Emily burst into tears when she saw him. He hugged her gently, careful of her condition, holding her the way you hold something fragile and priceless. He didn't say much at first. He just listened while she talked through sobs about the alarms, the fear, the feeling of being hunted in her own home. His jaw tightened with every word. That afternoon, Daniel asked to see everything. Emails, letters, fines, videos, recordings. He organized them methodically, building timelines, labeling files, backing everything up in multiple places. This isn't an HOA dispute, he said finally. This is targeted harassment with a documented disability. She's violating federal law. I asked him if Karen knew. He shook his head. She thinks this is small, local, contained. That's when he smiled just slightly. She's wrong. Karen noticed Daniel the same day. She was driving past when she saw him unloading bags from a car. She slowed down, stared, then pulled over. She walked up with that familiar smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "I don't believe we've met," she said brightly. Daniel turned to face her. "No," he replied calmly, "but I know you." Her smile tightened. "And you are?" "I'm Emily's son." Something flickered across her face, curiosity, then dismissal. "Oh," she said. "Well, perhaps you can help your parents understand that this community has rules." Daniel nodded. "I understand rules very well," he said. Karen laughed. "Military, right?" she said, glancing at his haircut. "That doesn't impress me." Daniel didn't react. What Karen didn't see was me standing on the porch, phone recording every second. That night, the alarm didn't go off. Instead, the fines escalated. A $1,000 violation notice arrived the next morning for ongoing noncompliance. No specifics, no explanation, just a demand. Daniel read it slowly. "She's panicking," he said. "People who are confident don't rush like this." Karen called an emergency HOA meeting for that weekend. Mandatory attendance. Daniel insisted we go. Emily was terrified. The thought of facing Karen in public made her physically ill. "We'll sit near the exit," Daniel said gently, "and you won't speak unless you wanna." The meeting room was full. Neighbors whispered when we walked in. Some avoided eye contact. Others nodded sympathetically. Karen stood at the front, confident, authoritative. She began with a speech about community integrity and abuse of accommodation claims. Then she did something unbelievably reckless. She pointed directly at Emily. "Some residents," she said loudly, "use medical excuses to manipulate rules. This board will not be bullied by emotional stories." The room went silent. Emily froze. Daniel stood up. Slowly. Every eye turned to him. "My mother has a federally documented disability," he said evenly. "Your alarm has triggered multiple medical emergencies." Karen scoffed. "This is an HOA matter," she snapped. "Not a courtroom." Daniel nodded. "You're right," he said. "Not yet." That's when he placed a small speaker on the table. Karen frowned. Before she could object, Daniel pressed play. The room filled with the sound of the alarm. People flinched, covered their ears, winced. Daniel let it play for 10 seconds, then shut it off. "That," he said calmly, "is what you activate outside my mother's bedroom. Repeatedly. On purpose." Murmurs spread through the room. Karen turned red. "You can't play recordings without permission," she shouted. Daniel looked at her. "Actually," he said, "I can't," and that was the mild version. Karen tried to regain control. "This meeting is adjourned," she said sharply. "No," Daniel replied. "This harassment is." Karen stormed out. The next morning, she made her fatal mistake. She sent an email to the entire HOA. In it, she wrote, "The family on Oak Ridge Drive is exaggerating medical issues to resist enforcement. We must remain firm." Daniel stared at the screen. "She just put intent in writing," he said quietly. Within hours, that email was forwarded to a civil rights attorney. Then another. Then another. Karen didn't realize what she'd done until the cease and desist letter arrived. Certified mail. Federal letterhead. She showed up at our door that afternoon. No clipboard. No smile. "You need to drop this," she said urgently. "This has gone too far." Daniel stepped outside. "It went too far when you use pain as a tool," he replied. She scoffed weakly. "You think you can scare me with lawyers?" Daniel met her eyes. "No," he said. "We're going to expose you." For the first time since this began, Karen looked afraid. That night, the alarm stayed silent. But the damage was already done. Karen had crossed from petty power into permanent consequence. And she had no idea how loud the fallout was about to be. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Not in a courtroom. Not yet, but in a neutral municipal building where HOA disputes, civil complaints, and uncomfortable truths were handled under fluorescent lights and stiff chairs. Emily almost didn't go. Her hands shook as she buttoned her sweater. Her doctor had warned her to avoid stress, loud environments, confrontation. But she looked at Daniel. "I need to be there," she said quietly. "I need to say out loud. We arrived early. Karen arrived late." She walked in fast, heels clicking sharply against the floor, head high, jaw set. She wore a tailored blazer, armor masquerading as professionalism. 2 HOA board members followed her, both avoiding eye contact. The mediator began by explaining the process. Karen interrupted. "This is a waste of time," she snapped. "This is an HOA enforcement issue, not a civil rights case." The mediator raised an eyebrow. "That will be determined," she replied calmly. Daniel squeezed Emily's hand. The first evidence presented was simple. Emails, page after page of them, Karen's words on the screen, her dismissive tone, her warnings, her fines, her refusal to acknowledge medical documentation. Karen shifted in her seat. Then the audio played. The alarm. Even through the small speakers, it was unbearable. The sound filled the room like a physical force. One of the board members covered his ears. Emily flinched instinctively. The mediator stopped the recording after 10 seconds. "You activated this?" she asked Karen. Karen hesitated. "For security," she replied. The mediator nodded. "And you were informed this caused severe medical harm?" Karen crossed her arms. "I wasn't convinced it was legitimate." That sentence hung in the air. Daniel leaned forward. "Do you believe you're qualified to determine medical legitimacy?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it. The mediator turned to Emily. "Would you like to speak?" Emily stood slowly. Her voice shook, but she didn't stop. She described the pain, the seizures, the fear of sleeping in her own home, the humiliation of being labeled a liar. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't apologize. Not once. When she finished, the room was silent. Karen looked uncomfortable. Then came the witnesses, the neighbor who heard Karen brag about forcing people out, the HOA member who warned Karen to stop, the police officer who documented repeated calls. Each testimony tightened the noose. Karen grew defensive. "They're exaggerating," she snapped. "This family is disruptive, emotional." Daniel stood. "My mother is disabled," he said evenly. "Your characterization doesn't change that." Then he revealed the final piece. The email, the one where Karen wrote, "We must remain firm." Intent, motivation, written proof. The mediator exhaled slowly. "This constitutes targeted harassment," she said, "and a likely ADA violation." Karen's face drained of color. The mediator continued. "This case will be referred for formal investigation. Effective immediately, you are instructed to cease all enforcement actions against this family." Karen slammed her folder shut. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "You're overreacting." The mediator looked directly at her. "No," she said. "You underestimated." Outside the room, Karen finally lost control. She turned on Emily. "You ruined this," she snapped. "You could have just followed the rules." Daniel stepped between them. "She followed the law," he said. "You didn't." Within days, the fallout spread. The HOA board called an emergency vote. Karen was removed as president, then as a board member, then barred from representing the HOA in any capacity. A restraining order followed. She was prohibited from contacting us, approaching our home, or engaging in any HOA enforcement activity. The alarm was ordered removed. When the technician arrived to dismantle it, Emily watched from the window. When it finally came down, she started crying. Not from pain, from relief. Karen didn't apologize. She didn't need to. Consequences spoke louder than any alarm ever could. The neighborhood felt different after that. Quieter, not because of rules, but because fear was gone. And as we drove home from the final meeting, Emily rested her head against the window and whispered, "I feel safe." That was the moment I knew this fight had been worth it. Karen lost her power that day, but something far more important was restored. Dignity. The first night after the alarm was removed, the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything was missing, but because something terrible was finally gone. Emily stood in the bedroom doorway for a long time, hesitant, as if expecting the sound to return the moment she stepped inside. The bed was exactly where it had always been. The curtains hung quietly. The window faced the same street. But the fear wasn't there. She lay down slowly, hands clenched, breathing shallow at first. I sat beside her, watching the clock, waiting for that familiar surge of panic. Nothing happened. No shriek. No strobe. No pain. Just silence. Emily fell asleep within minutes, the deepest sleep I'd seen in months. I sat there in the dark, listening to her breathe, realizing how much damage had been done not just to her body, but to her sense of safety. Homes are supposed to protect you. When they don't, the world feels hostile everywhere. In the days that followed, the neighborhood changed. People who had avoided us before started stopping by. Quiet apologies, awkward smiles. A neighbor left flowers on our porch with a note that simply said, "We should have spoken up sooner." Emily began walking outside again. Just short walks at first, then longer ones. Each step was a small victory over the fear Karen had tried to plant in her. Daniel stayed a few extra days before returning to duty. On his last morning, he stood on the porch and looked down the street, the same street where the alarm once screamed. She thought power was about control, he said, but real power is accountability. Karen moved shortly after. No announcement. No goodbye. Her house went up for sale, quietly. The HOA board released a statement about new leadership and restored values. They never used her name. They didn't need to. Emily continued therapy, slowly, carefully. Healing isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's boring. It's fragile. But it's real. One afternoon, weeks later, Emily stood in the kitchen, sunlight on her face humming softly. I froze when I heard it. She hadn't done that in years. I forgot how much I missed music, she said, smiling through tears. I realized then that Karen hadn't just tried to force us out of a neighborhood. She had tried to erase a person. And she failed. What stayed with me most wasn't Karen's cruelty, it was how easily it was enabled. By silence. By rules without empathy. By people who said, "It's not my problem." Until it was. Because injustice doesn't need villains to succeed. It just needs permission. If you're watching this and you've ever felt powerless in your own home, if you've ever been dismissed, minimized, or told your pain wasn't valid, this story is for you. You are not weak for needing accommodations. You are not difficult for protecting your health. And you are not alone. Speak up. Document everything. Find allies. And never let anyone convince you that suffering quietly is the price of belonging. Emily sleeps peacefully now. The street is quiet again. And silence, real silence, has finally returned to her home. If this story made you feel angry, if it broke your heart, or if it reminded you of something you've lived through, don't stay silent. Backhand index pointing right like this video, so this story reaches someone who needs it. Backhand index pointing right. Subscribe to the channel for real, powerful stories about injustice and courage. Backhand index pointing right. Comment your city and tell us, have you ever faced HOA, abuse, discrimination, or harassment? Your story matters. Your voice matters. Because when ordinary people speak up together, even the loudest bullies lose their power.